Our own child locked us downstairs. But my husband warned. Hush. I hid something. The house had its own slow, steady breath. In the early light, when the Georgia sun pushed through the pecan trees, the air inside turned gold and still, and tiny specks of dust drifted like lazy fireflies in tall columns. At night, the boards relaxed with soft creaks, as if the old bones of the place were sighing after another long day. Idella had lived inside that breathing for 4 decades. The plaster, the floorboards, the chipped molding had watched her age, watched her pray, watched her cook. Her father-in-law, Langston Dubois, had raised the walls with his own hands. He hadn't built a showpiece. He'd built a fortress for his line, a place where grandchildren would run down the hallways and great-grandchildren would fall asleep on the porch swing. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. That morning, Idella arranged carrots into tiny uniform squares on a cutting board, letting the rhythm of the knife calm her. Chicken broth simmered on the stove the way her grandmother taught her, simple and clear, scented with dill and bay leaf. Cornelius barely ate these days, but sometimes the smell of that soup could coax him to take a few spoonfuls. She remembered a time when a round-faced boy stood on a wooden stool beside her, clutching a plastic knife. "Mama, I'm a chef," he'd crowed, and their laughter had soaked into the kitchen table like spilled juice. The memory cracked when a sharp voice sliced through it. "That bland mush again, Ms. Idella?" Kessia leaned on the doorway, silk robe tied tight, arms crossed as if to ward off the smell of the kitchen. "We talked about this. There are a million recipes online. Creamed broccoli, gazpacho, something that sounds like a restaurant, at least. My husband needs proper food." She never called her Mama. Never even Mom. Just Ms. Idella, clipped and chilly, as if they were strangers bound by an unfortunate lease. "The man you married grew up on this soup," Idella replied quietly, still stirring the pot. "And his father loves it too." "Your husband can't tell broth from bathwater anymore," Kessia snapped. "But my husband can, and he deserves better." They had been living in the house for 3 years, ever since Cornelius's first stroke. At first, it had seemed like the natural right thing to do, family drawing closer around the wounded. Idella had given them the whole upstairs, the big bedroom with the balcony overlooking the pecan tree, the walk-in closets, the bathroom with the old clawfoot tub. She and Cornelius moved down to his former study so he wouldn't have to manage the stairs. Slowly the house shifted. Kessia's perfume, sharp, fashionable, expensive, pushed aside the smells of lemon oil and starch. Men's cologne, hair products, delivery food containers, LED screens glowing late into the night. These became the house's new heartbeat. Last week, Idella had come into the living room and found Langston's cracked leather armchair shoved into a corner like an unwanted relative. In its place, a white, boxy thing made of metal and leather sat in front of the window, all edges and attitude. "It doesn't match the modern vibe," Kessia had tossed over her shoulder, as if that settled the matter. Idella had said nothing. She simply waited until the house slept, then crept down and laid her palm on the armchair's worn leather, the way one strokes an old dog trying to understand why it's been banished. In that chair, Langston had read the newspaper aloud. In that chair, she had sat swollen with pregnancy, reading history texts and promising herself she'd go back to archival work once the baby was older. The baby had grown. Then Cornelius's career had needed tending. Her dreams had yellowed like pages in an untouched book. Cornelius lay now in his downstairs bed, eyes tracing patterns on the ceiling. His body had thinned and weakened, but sometimes his mind flashed clear, brief, and sharp. When she sat and took his hand, his skin felt like dry paper. "How are you, my love?" she whispered. He turned his head slowly, focused on the noise drifting down from upstairs. "They're loud," he murmured. The word carried far more than sound. It carried strangers' laughter and arguments about money, voices that battered the old quiet soul of the house. At lunch, Trevant slid into his chair without greeting, phone already in his hand, thumbs busy. Idella set a bowl of soup in front of him. He shoved it away with the back of his fingers. "Ma, we gotta talk. For real." Kessia appeared instantly, like she'd been waiting just off stage for her cue. She sat opposite her husband, hands folded, eyes bright with that hungry gleam Idella had learned to recognize. It meant a scheme had been hatched and she was ready to watch it bear fruit. "We've been thinking about the inheritance issue," Trevant began, not looking up from his phone. "All that paperwork, courts, taxes, drama. With Dad like this, it's messy. To keep things simple, you should sign the house over to me now. A deed of gift, just a formality. Makes everything easier later." The chill didn't come from the words. It came from how casually he said them, like he was asking whether to order takeout. Idella's hands stayed steady. "No," she replied. "This home belongs to your father and me. While we're alive, it stays that way." Kessia leaned forward, nails gleaming, perfume cutting through the smell of herbs. "So you want your only son digging through offices and lawyers later? You want to make his life harder when, well, you know." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Idella said, meeting her eyes. "And that's why my answer stays no." At last, her son lifted his gaze. There was no warmth in it, no leftover echo of the little boy in the chef's apron. Just impatience and a simmering anger, like she was a stubborn clerk refusing to stamp his papers. "I don't get why you're being difficult," he said. "We live here. We take care of Dad." "You live in our house," she corrected softly. "I care for your father." Cornelius appeared in the doorway then, gripping the frame, chest heaving. He must have heard enough. His eyes were suddenly bright, focused. "You," he rasped, staring at his son. "You shame our name." The word shame lashed across the room like a whip. "Excuse me." Trevant exploded, knocking his chair backward. "I'm the one carrying this name now. This house is mine by right. Always should have been mine." He took a step toward his father. Idella slipped between them. "Trevant, enough. Stop this." "I'm done," he snapped. "I'm tired. This is ours now." He grabbed his mother's shoulder, not quite cruel, but with a rough authority that had no place between parent and child. His other hand closed around his father's arm. Cornelius, weakened, dangled like cloth. With brutal efficiency, Trevant marched them down the hallway toward the heavy door leading to the basement. "Son, what are you doing?" Idella cried, bracing against the frame. "You need time to think," he growled. "Both of you." The basement door swung open. The damp smell of soil and old potatoes washed over them. He shoved them onto the top step. Idella barely kept her balance while holding on to Cornelius. The door slammed. A bolt scraped into place. Darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment, Idella couldn't move. Her knees met the cold step, and she drew Cornelius closer, listening to his ragged breath. Her own heart thudded in her ears, drowning out the house's old familiar creaks. Everything she had poured into that boy, every sacrifice, every denial of herself, seemed to arrive at this damp, black stare. Then, in the dark, she felt his lips near her ear. "Quiet," Cornelius whispered. "They don't know what's hidden behind that wall." The house above them shifted and groaned, reacting to slammed doors and hurried footsteps. Somewhere overhead, drawers opened and closed. Kessia's heels tapped across hardwood. Then the front door banged, a car engine revved, and the sound faded down the road, leaving only the murmur of the old structure. "Help me down," Cornelius breathed. There was determination in him now, buried under the weakness. Step by careful step, they descended to the packed earth floor. The basement smelled of old root vegetables and rain that had seeped through cement. A weak strip of light bled in from under the door at the top of the stairs, but down here shapes blurred together. Shelves, jars, boxes, the faint outline of long-abandoned tools. Cornelius didn't shuffle toward the shelves or the old freezer. He went straight for the far wall, the one that supported the house's weight. "Here," he murmured, palms sliding along the rough stones. "My father showed me when I was a boy. Told me it was for desperate days. I thought that was just old man talk. He moved his hand, fingers searching for something only memory could see. When he paused, Idella pressed a palm where he guided. One stone felt identical to the rest. Damp, coarse, unremarkable. Still, she pushed. It shifted inward with a faint scrape. Behind it yawned a small dark cavity. She slipped her hand inside and touched cold metal. Her fingers closed around a tobacco tin, the kind men kept in their shirt pockets when she was a girl. It was so light it could have been empty. Carrying it back to the stairs, she sat beside Cornelius. His fingers trembled as he flicked at the latch. After several tries, it popped open. Idella had half expected the glint of coins, maybe a ring, a few emergency bills. Instead, there were only papers, folded and yellowed, delicate as old leaves. Cornelius lifted the top one and smoothed it carefully. "Read," he said, voice tight. In the thin slice of light, she recognized the format before she made out the words. A birth certificate. The name written in the looping script was not familiar. Cassius Thorne, she read slowly. Born in a prison hospital in Mississippi. The mother's name was blacked out. The father's name, Orion Thorne. Her tongue stumbled. Cornelius. What is this? He closed his eyes. That's me, he whispered. Who I was before Langston Dubois took me in. The world tilted. For 40 years, she had been married to Cornelius Dubois, son of an esteemed doctor, scion of a respected black family with deep professional roots. In one fragile page, that certainty cracked. Her husband took another document from the tin. An adoption decree. Cassius Thorne, adopted by Langston James Dubois, full rights as son and heir, new name. Cornelius James Dubois. At the bottom lay a letter in Langston's familiar hand. Cornelius passed it to her. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and old ink. The words were written in a clear, forceful script. My son, if these lines reach your hands, then the days are dark and I no longer stand between you and the shadows of your past. Langston described Orion Thorne as brilliant and stubborn. A man who refused to bend when the government demanded he lend his mind to a project he believed would end in catastrophe. For that refusal, he was branded a traitor, accused of treason, and buried inside a prison with no trial the world would ever see. Langston, colleague and friend, had taken the man's child and changed his name to keep him safe, to wipe away the mark stamped on a traitor's son. He urged Cornelius to live honorably under the Dubois name but never to forget whose courage flowed in his veins. The words blurred. Idella swallowed, folding the letter with reverent fingers. The cold of the basement seeped through her coat, but there was another chill growing, inside at the center of her chest. All those years, Cornelius had carried this secret, never trusting the world, perhaps never fully trusting her with it. He had protected the borrowed name, the reputation that wasn't tied to his blood but had become his armor. Their son, so proud of his surname, had built his identity on a foundation that wasn't what he believed at all. Old humiliations, Kessia's cutting remarks, Trevant's entitlement, his casual orders, his contempt, each memory rose like smoke and funneled into a point of pure clarity. Idella's mind, trained by years of handling fragile documents and complicated histories, woke up fully. This wasn't just a family secret. It was leverage. Not a dagger, but a ledger. And in the right hands, ledgers could ruin kings. She sat in the half-dark while Cornelius slumped against her shoulder and drifted in and out of sleep. Time lost its shape. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. Outside, the world continued. Cars passing, birds calling, neighbors living ordinary mornings. Down here, something else shifted. A woman who had spent her life putting everyone else's story first quietly began drafting a new one. When at last the bolt scraped back and light exploded down the stairwell, Idella felt the plan in her bones, cold and precise. Trevant appeared in the doorway, outlined by daylight. His smirk said he believed the lesson had sunk in. Well, he asked. Had time to think. He tried on concern like an accessory. Dad, you feeling worse? Need me to call someone? Yes, Idella said steadily, rising. He needs medical help. Give me your phone. I'll make the call. For a heartbeat he hesitated, thrown off by her even tone. Then he handed her his phone with a mocking little shrug. One call, Ma. Nurse, doctor, pharmacy. Nothing else. The smooth rectangle hummed in her hand. She did not scroll through his contacts. She dialed a number she had memorized from a magazine article years ago. An attorney in Savannah known for tearing apart dirty family games. She had clipped the page then, thinking, one never knows. This is Attorney Vita Sterling, came a crisp voice. Ms. Sterling, Idella said, eyes on her son's expectant face. My name is Idella Dubois. I believe you and I can be of great use to each other. Days collapsed into a strange quiet. On the surface, life returned to its worn routine. Broth simmering, laundry folding, medications measured with care. Idella moved through the house like a shadow, soft-footed, unseen. It suited them. They preferred her invisible. To them, she was a spent force now, frightened into submission. It was the biggest mistake they made. Their guard dropped. They talked loudly in front of her. They planned renovations for rooms she had tended for half her life as if she were a housekeeper instead of the woman who had scrubbed those baseboards and polished that banister until it shone. One morning, as she set a plate of biscuits on the table, she overheard Kessia flipping through a decor magazine. We'll open up this whole area, she said, stabbing a manicured finger at an invisible wall. That old study wall isn't load-bearing. Knock it down, one big living space, bar counter here. Very modern. The books? Trevant asked absently, spooning sugar into his coffee. We'll get rid of them. Donate. Recycle. Nobody reads that old stuff. Idella's hand paused for a fraction of a second, skillet hovering. That wall had held Langston's desk. That wallpaper still held a faint graphite slash marking 5-year-old Trevant's height. Those shelves held rare volumes on Black history that Langston had hunted down one at a time, the pride of his life. They spoke of it all as if it were musty wallpaper. She kept her face smooth, placed the biscuits, and walked away. Inside, her last illusions shriveled. Whatever line exists between selfishness and cruelty, they had firmly crossed. A few nights later, they came to her room, faces arranged into concern. Cornelius slept, chest rising shallowly. The lamplight softened his features. Mom, Trevant began in a gentle tone she hadn't heard since he was a teenager trying to borrow the car. Kessia and I have talked. We know this is all too much for you, the house, Dad, the stress. You've done enough. You deserve to rest. Kessia stepped in with a practiced, sympathetic smile. We found a beautiful seniors community, Ms. Idella. Not some awful home. Private room, gardens, nurses, events. You'll meet people your age, make friends. We'll visit every weekend. You can finally relax. Relax. In a single room somewhere miles from the nearest pecan tree, cut off from every floorboard that knew her footsteps. You'd be safe there, Trevant added. And it would take the pressure off us. We want what's best for you. Idella studied her son's face, searching for even a flicker of shame. There was none. Only eagerness to have this conversation over so he could get back to his life. Something deep inside her gave way, not dramatically, not with tears, but like an old spring quietly snapping. The machinery of mother first, self last, stilled. That's a very generous offer, she said calmly. I need to think about it. They both exhaled in relief, misreading her composure as surrender. Of course, Kessia cooed. We just don't want you to be lonely. After they left, Idella sat in the dim glow of the bedside lamp and looked at a cluster of framed photos. Wedding smiles, a baby on Cornelius's shoulders, 3 faces pressed together at a beach years ago. For a long moment, grief tried to rise, but something stronger stood in its way, a steady, icy resolve. They had freed her, from the duties they never respected, from the debt they never acknowledged. The next day, under the pretense of needing a special prescription from a pharmacy in town, She took a taxi to a glass-walled office building in Savannah. Attorney Vita Sterling greeted her in a fitted suit, expression contained and watchful. There were no soft murmurs of consolation, no dramatic gasps. "Tell me what's been happening," Vita said simply. Idella laid out the story like files on a table. The move-in, the insults, the pressure to sign, the basement, the hidden box. She placed the documents on the polished desk, the prison birth certificate, the adoption decree, Langston's letter. Vita read them slowly, lips pressed together, a small line digging into her brow. "This is remarkable," the attorney murmured at last. "The Dubois name has weight. Your son's career, his connections, they're tied to that reputation. If it becomes public that his father was adopted and he's actually the grandson of a man branded a traitor in certain circles, it will hit like a hammer. Fair or not, that's how these worlds work." "I'm not out for blood," Idella said quietly. "I want my home, and I want them out of it." "You will get that," Vita answered. "And probably more. Give me some time. I need to verify a few things about Orion Thorne and the old case. The more I understand, the stronger our position." While Idella returned to the rhythms of the house, Vita dug into buried files and whispered academic gossip. When she called days later, her voice carried a taut energy. Orion Thorne, she explained, had been a leading theoretical physicist in his era, recruited to work on a project whose details still rested under layers of classification. When he refused, believing the consequences would be catastrophic, the government crushed him. They fabricated charges of espionage, held a secret trial, and erased his name from public records. "In the circles your son moves in," Vita said, "that old whisper of treason still echoes. If we drag this all into the light, it won't just be about a house, Mrs. Dubois. We could ruin him socially, professionally, financially." Idella stood at the kitchen window, watching a squirrel dart along the pecan tree branch while the attorney spoke. She felt the weight of what lay in her hands, not a simple lever but a bomb. The thought of obliterating her son's world should have horrified her. Instead, a cool, terrible sense of balance settled over her. He had tried to strip her of everything, to toss her into a tidy facility and erase her. Now she understood exactly what erasing truly looked like. When the car finally pulled back into the driveway that evening, bags of home decor clattering in the trunk, Idella no longer felt small. She stepped into the hallway not as someone waiting to be dismissed, but as the person who knew where every dangerous page in the family archive was kept. 2 mornings later, the doorbell rang. Trevant, irritated, went to answer it. Idella stayed where she was in the living room, hands folded on her lap. On the porch stood Vita in a dark, perfectly cut suit, briefcase in hand. Beside her, a courier clutched a bulky envelope. "Mr. Dubois?" she asked, her tone professional and cool. "Yes. And you are?" "My name is Attorney Sterling. I represent the owner of this property, Mrs. Idella Dubois. This is for you." She passed him the envelope. Kessia, drawn by the voices, appeared at his shoulder. He tore it open impatiently, scanning the top page. Color drained from his face, then rushed back in a red flood. "Eviction." He barked an incredulous laugh. "Mama, is this your idea of a joke? You hired some actress to scare us." Kessia snatched the papers, skimmed, and scoffed. "Come now, Ms. Idella. We weren't expecting this level of dramatics. There's already a deed of gift. The house belongs to my husband." She strutted to the sideboard, pulled out a folder, and handed over a document with a flourish. "This is the real paper. You might want to let your paralegal brush up on her research." Vita lifted the deed to the light, studying the seal and signature. Her expression didn't change. "Interesting piece," she said at last. "Especially the notary stamp. I know this notary. Unfortunately, he died 2 years before this signature was supposedly witnessed. Must have been quite a challenge to notarize from beyond the grave." The silence that followed dropped like a curtain. "It's all a misunderstanding," Kessia said, but her voice had gone thin. "It's forgery," Vita answered gently. And if I hand this to a forensic examiner, that will be confirmed. In this state, that's not just unethical. It's a felony. Trevant's bravado faltered. You can't threaten us in our own house, he snarled. I'm not threatening, Vita replied calmly. I'm outlining what will happen if we go to court. As it stands, the property belongs to Mrs. Dubois under your grandfather's will, which I also hold. He left everything to his daughter-in-law in gratitude for her care. Your father never challenged it. You have been guests, not owners, guests who attempted to alter the records. We'll contest it, he shouted. We'll prove she's not competent, that you manipulated her. I'm the only direct Dubois heir. This house should have come to me. Vita tilted her head. To make that argument, she said softly, you would first have to demonstrate your own legal standing as an heir. That means a complete, public review of the Dubois family line. Full genealogical documentation. DNA. Old records dragged out of every archive that still remembers the name Dubois, or Thorne. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. The quiet that followed thrummed with things unspoken. Kessia's face showed confusion. But in her son's eyes, Idella saw comprehension dawn like a storm on the horizon. He didn't know the details, but he understood this. The one thing he had always placed on the highest shelf, his last name, was in danger. Vita closed her briefcase. You have 3 days to vacate, Mr. Dubois, she said. My client would prefer a clean resolution. I advise you to take it. Then she nodded at Idella and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, neat as a period at the end of a sentence. The living room air grew thick, heavy with aftershocks. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then rage slammed back into Trevant like a wave. What have you done? He shouted, turning on his mother. You trying to ruin us? Tear your own family down? Over a house. Kessia paced, fingers hair-combing through carefully styled curls, eyes wild. What genealogy? She demanded. What is she talking about? What secrets have you and your father been hiding from us? Threats poured out, mental evaluations, guardianship hearings, accusations that she was unfit. They flung words as if they were rocks that could knock sense into her. Idella listened in silence. Their fury broke over her like rain on stone. She had already done her weeping in years past. There was nothing left for their outrage to soak into. When shouting lost its power, they tried another script. Kessia slumped into a chair, covering her face in practiced despair. Ms. Idella. Mama, she sobbed, the word tasting awkward in her mouth. We love you. We made mistakes, but everything we've done is for your good. We were just trying to protect you from making decisions you'd regret. Trevant crouched in front of his mother's chair, attempting a pleading gaze. Ma, look at me, he said, voice low and tremulous. You know me. You raised me. You gave up your job, your whole career for me. Are you really going to throw your own son out? Was all that sacrifice just to end like this? He spoke about her sacrifices like they were cards he could slam down to win the hand. He talked about the Dubois name as if it were a holy banner, something he marched beneath for the sake of his ancestors, not knowing how crooked his own path had become. Idella looked at him, really looked, and saw what she had been refusing to see, a man who could not imagine himself existing without that surname. It was not love keeping him here. It was fear of being ordinary, or worse, exposed. She felt pity, not the soft kind that turns to apology, but the deep ache one feels for someone who built his life on a lie he never bothered to understand. The house, she said quietly, is the smallest piece of this, son. He blinked. What's that supposed to mean? You've lived your whole life demanding respect for a legacy that doesn't belong to you the way you think it does, she answered. The name you worship, the story you tell about yourself, it's thinner than you realize. Ghost thin. She left it there. She didn't say thorn. She didn't mention Orion or prison or erasure. She let his imagination fill the silence with whatever shame he feared most. The not knowing would gnaw at him far more than any single, solid fact. You have 3 days to pack, she finished, standing. I'd use them wisely. She walked out, leaving the two of them in the echo of their own choices. It only took those 3 days for desperation to harden into strategy. On the evening of the 3rd day, her son appeared in her doorway, wearing his best suit like armor. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. At our place in town, he said stiffly. We're calling a family meeting. Aunt Vera, Uncle Peter, some colleagues. You and your lawyer will be there. We're going to settle this properly. It was a last gambit, an attempt to drag the battle onto stage in front of an audience that knew them all. They hoped public opinion, fueled by the image of a devoted son and unstable mother, would tilt the scales. Idella nodded once. Fine, she said. We'll be there. The city apartment was everything the old house was not. Wide, glossy and impersonal, all glass and chrome and beige. Family already filled the space when Idella and Vita arrived. Peter with his polished politician smile, Vera layered in pearls, cousins she hadn't seen in years. There were also men and women in sleek suits, faces set into neutral, evaluating lines, business partners. Conversations died as they stepped in. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. People saw the stooped gray-haired woman, noted the expensive lawyer by her side, thick briefcase in hand, and drew their conclusions. Trevant stood in the center, Kessia at his elbow. He cleared his throat and began to speak with a solemnity he must have practiced in the mirror. He talked about how he had always honored the Dubois legacy, how he and his wife had taken in his parents, how heartbreaking it had been to watch his dear mother's mind slip with age. He never outright said, mentally unfit, but the implication hung between every line. He described an outsider, a lawyer, who had allegedly whispered poison into his mother's ear, turning her against her own child, convincing her to sabotage the future of the family. He framed the fight as an attempt to protect her from herself. Conservatorship, he suggested politely, might be the only way to shield her from exploitation. By the time he finished, some relatives were already nodding, eyes soft with sympathy for him. The partners watched with guarded understanding. Here was a man managing an unfortunate domestic problem as gracefully as he could. That's the situation, he concluded, hands spread in weary resignation. We're just trying to care for her. We want to make sure she and Dad have a roof over their heads and that the house stays in the family, where it belongs. The room murmured. For a moment, the performance held. Then Vita stood. She didn't adopt the tone of an attacker. She sounded like a teacher calling the class back to the textbook. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Dubois, she said. Now let's look at what we can actually prove. She laid the forged deed on the coffee table. Here is the document your son and his wife used to claim ownership of the house, she said, projecting her voice just enough to reach every corner. As you can see, it bears what appears to be Mrs. Dubois's signature and a notary seal. But here, she set down a second paper, is the handwriting analyst's report stating that signature is not hers. And this is a record from the notary's office confirming the man who supposedly notarized it died 2 years before he allegedly stamped this. A ripple of discomfort ran through the room. Vera's fingers tightened around her pearls. One of the business partners leaned forward, eyes narrowing. These are just accusations, Kessia burst out. You can hire anyone to write whatever you want. These are certified reports, Vita replied, prepared by licensed professionals who would happily testify under oath. But that's only the beginning. She stepped back and looked at Idella. My client would like to say something. Idella rose slowly. In that moment, she felt not like a mother on trial, but like a historian presenting findings. All my life, she began, I have tended the story of the Dubois family. I married into it, I lived in its house, I carried its name. Legacy is not just walls and money. It's the truth about how we came to be. She opened her folder and placed Langston's letter on the table. This is from my father-in-law to my husband. In it, Langston explains that the boy we all know as Cornelius Dubois was born under another name, to a man who was punished for standing up for his convictions. Langston took that child in, gave him his name, his home, his education, and his love. Murmurs rose, startled, confused. Someone asked, "You mean Cornelius was adopted?" "Yes," Idella said. "And Langston left his house not to his adopted son, but to me, the woman he believed would guard this place and its story. That is what his will says." She nodded toward another paper Vita produced. "My son decided that instead of respecting that wish, he would try to grab the house through a forged deed, pushing his own parents out." She didn't say a word about prison trials or erased scientists. She didn't speak of treason. She wasn't interested in hanging the family's secrets out for the world. It was enough to lay greed beside generosity and let others judge the contrast. Uncle Peter took off his glasses and bent over the letter, reading slowly. He straightened, looking first at Idella, then at her son. Whatever he saw there made his mouth flatten. The business partners didn't ask questions. Their faces had already hardened into caution. Within minutes, chairs scraped and hands were shaken in stiff silence. One by one, they left, murmuring excuses. Kessia clung to her husband's arm, color draining from her cheeks as she watched the doors close behind opportunities walking away. All her talk of marble countertops and modern vibes collapsed into the reality of potential lawsuits and whispered scandals. In the center of the room, surrounded by abandoned glasses and half-eaten snacks, stood Trevant. The aura of control he had worn like a tailored suit shredded. People who mattered to him most, not blood, but those who stroked his ego and signed his checks, had seen him as a fraud. They had heard that his claim to the house rested on a lie and that even the name he placed on his business cards wasn't rooted where he believed. Idella didn't wait for another outburst. She turned to go. What shattered behind her now was not her problem. As she stepped into the hallway toward the elevator, she felt Vita fall into step beside her. Neither woman spoke. Outside, a breeze moved through the city, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt clean. Half a year slid by, season painting the garden in broad strokes. Summer baked the earth and ripened the pecans. Autumn came with crisp mornings and leaves turning bronze and crimson. The house breathed the way it always had, but the sounds inside it had grown gentle again. There were no heavy steps overhead at midnight, no booming televisions, no slammed doors. Cornelius slipped away in late summer, his heart finally exhausted. He died in his own bed, in the room that had once been his father's study, sunlight sliding through lace curtains and laying soft stripes across the quilt. Idella held his hand until the last breath left him. They did not speak of secrets or of sons. Instead, they told each other small good stories. The day they first met at the park, the time he nearly flooded the kitchen trying to fix a sink, the early years when money was tight but laughter came easily. She grieved him not as a man with two names, but as the one person who had shared 4 decades of mornings and nights with her. She buried him beside Langston at the small cemetery on the hill, 2 headstones together, one bearing the Dubois name by birth, one by choice. They had both carried burdens and tried, in their ways, to shield others. Word drifted through the family grapevine that after the disaster of the family council, her son and his wife had left town. The city apartment was sold to pay off debts no one had known existed. A cousin mentioned, almost in passing, that Kessia now worked as a receptionist at a salon in a small Alabama town. No one was sure what work, if any, Trevant had found. He never called. He never wrote. To Idella, he became exactly what she had once warned him about. A ghost, a story with a blank ending. She felt no triumph when she thought of him. The vengeance, such as it was, had been completed the day she walked out of his apartment while his world collapsed behind her. What remained afterward was emptiness, a wide, quiet space where maternal love used to live. Over time, that space began to fill with something unexpected, an awareness of herself. One cool afternoon, she descended the same basement stairs where she had once trembled, both from cold and betrayal. The steps had been repaired. The walls gleamed with fresh white paint. The dank smell of rot was gone, replaced by the faint scent of new lumber and lime wash. Electric lights shone bright overhead. Where dusty jars and broken tools had once cluttered the corners, new pine shelves now stood in neat rows, waiting. In the middle of the room, a large wooden table dominated the space. A comfortable chair sat behind it. On a small windowsill, the workers had cut in a narrow window that let in a ribbon of daylight, rested a simple clay pot with a small fern unfurling fresh leaves. This room, once her prison, had become her archive. Idella spread out the documents on the table: Langston's letter, the adoption papers, a copy of the will, faded photographs of family gatherings, her own college notebook pages with notes scribbled in tidy, eager handwriting. Carefully, she took a new album bound in dark leather and opened it. The first page received Langston's letter, secured under transparent corners. Next to it, she placed a photograph not of weddings or birthdays, but of herself at 20, short hair, glasses slightly askew, sitting at a university library table, half smiling at the camera with stacks of books at her elbows. That young woman had once believed she would spend a life in archives, tracking down stories, restoring lost names, making sure history could not be easily rewritten. Somewhere along the way, marriage, motherhood, illness, and duty, she had shelved herself. Now, in the quiet of the basement, she took herself off the shelf. She did not erase her years as a wife or as a mother. The album would hold memories of scraped knees and birthday cakes, of late-night talks and shared tragedies. But she chose where to place them, what weight to give each. The moment in the basement, the tin box in her hands, the decision to fight, that page too would have its place. Not as a story about destroying a son, but as the moment she refused to let someone else write her ending. She moved to the little window, mug of Earl Grey warming her palms. From this vantage point, she did not see branches and sky. She saw earth and roots, the hidden half of every tree. Fallen leaves lay scattered on top of the ground, already beginning to sag into the soil that would feed next spring's green. The glass fogged slightly with each breath she exhaled. Upstairs, the house waited, ready to hold whatever new life she invited into it. Maybe she would host other elders for tea, or mentor young archivists at the college. Maybe she would simply spend her days reading at the window and cataloging the stories of the people who came before. Whatever she chose, the choice would be hers. For the first time in many years, Idella did not define herself by who depended on her or who disappointed her. She was no longer just someone's wife or only someone's mother-turned-burden. She was once again what she had been at 20, a woman in love with truth and paper and memory. Only now, she understood that her own life deserved to be preserved with the same care she'd given everyone else's. If one were to turn her story into a tale told aloud, a voice over soft music, reaching strangers late at night, it would be a story about boundaries, where love ends and self-betrayal begins, where forgiveness yields to self-respect. Some listeners would insist she went too far, that a mother should always spare her child, no matter how badly he behaves. Others would quietly cheer the moment she refused to be buried alive in her own basement or sent away to fade in a pretty facility while strangers painted over her past. However people judged her, the ending belonged to her. In the cool, bright calm of the archive she had built, Idella set down her empty teacup, picked up her pen, and began to write. Her story in her own hand.